New April events at Authentically Us. Thursday, April 3rd, dealing with negativity for women who are coming out. Thursday, April 10th, healing after your catalyst relationship. Thursday, April 17th, spirituality and faith in the coming out journey. Thursday, April 24th, dating workshop for late blooming lesbians. Tuesday, April 29th, speed friending. For more information, visit the link in the podcast description or join Authentically Us at Anne-MarieZanzal.com. Hey, queer friends and allies. Welcome to Season 6 of Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA+ stories. Here's your host, Anne-Marie Zanzal.
Hello, folks. This is Anne-Marie Zanzal, and welcome to another episode of Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA+ stories. I'm really excited to welcome Dr. Tina Schermer-Sellers. She is a licensed sex and gender feminist psychotherapist, writer, researcher, and media personality whose expertise spans sex therapy, spiritual intimacy, parenting, psychedelic-assisted therapy, and the healing of religious sexual trauma, and social justice. She has been featured on platforms like NPR's All Things Considered, TV, radio, and many podcasts to share her important insights, and her revolutionary perspectives have been printed by Spirituality and Health magazine, Bus magazine, and many news outlets. Known for exposing the impact of sexual shame and trauma on our ability to attach to our partners and instruct our children to attach to theirs, Dr. Sellers' book, Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, Erasing Shame from Sexual Intimacy, has been a global impact. Her latest book, Shameless Parenting, Everything You Need to Raise a Shame-Free, Confident Kids and Heal Your Shame Too, was a new release bestseller in 8 categories. She speaks throughout the world on how to heal and how to raise shame-free, relationally confident children. She can be followed on Instagram at Dr. Tina Shameless Sex. Hi, Dr. Tina. Welcome to the show.
Hi, and thank you so much for having me, Anne-Marie. I'm so glad to be here.
I am so excited to talk to you. Shame is a big topic I deal in my own practice with a lot of my clients. So I really want to dive into this topic. But first, I'd like to ask you, how did you become such a fierce advocate for the queer community?
Well, it really began by having, I was housed in a Swedish immigrant family that was very body and sex positive and people positive. And I had many members of my family, including my father, who were just fierce justice advocates in their life for people and people being treated well. And so that just laid the groundwork for me to be curious about people as opposed to judgmental. And I had a lot of wonderful diversity in my own family growing up, as far as how people did relationships. And I think I grew up seeing people as fascinating and their stories as interesting and valid. And so that just kind of led on in my life, as I learned more and more and made more and more friends and had more and more people who are identifying in more and more diverse ways. And, I was born in the 60s. So I'm sort of a 60s baby, which is a time that's very different. Our country took a real hard turn in 1980. And so I think there was just a lot of acceptance in my childhood and curiosity about people and change and whatnot. And so I feel like I've been growing up as we've now come up with more and more terms that help people identify. I've been growing with those terms. And sometimes I'm like, oh, that's a totally new term, or, oh, that term would apply to all these people in my life. You know what I mean? That I was growing up with. And so I feel really fortunate to have been alive during these decades, both for the work that I get to do, but also the celebration that I get to do with people as they are able to be more visible and more celebrated. And I get to be a part of that. And I love that. It's a wonderful part of my life.
Well, what I hear you saying is that it was just normal for you to
Yeah.
have people that were having diverse experiences of life. So it was your normal. It's like when I see the Gen Zs grow up today, that like seeing representation of queer folks has been very normalized for them. I grew up in the 60s too, and I remember it was really big that they had a gay character on what was it, Soap.
Yeah.
I remember those things,
Yeah.
how it was not normalized, and now it's been more and more normalized. So I
Right.
appreciate that you had pretty much, just normalized within your family. So this begs the question, how did you get into healing sexual shame,
Right.
especially from religious traditions, conservative religious
Yeah.
traditions?
Right.
How did that happen?
I,
Because a lot of times people come from those traditions.
Sure.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so people will say, is this your story? And I'm like, yeah, no, it's not my story, but it's also because it wasn't my story that as I got exposed to the story, my heart literally broke. It just literally broke. And I'll often say I was probably in my 30s before I realized how odd my family was growing up,
Mhm.
because they were body and sex positive, but it was so normalized that you didn't notice it,
Mhm.
right? Like my grandmother wore a bikini until she died, like, but that was normal. That was how it was, and people were different shapes and sizes. I remember a whole group of Swedes came over one time when I was to visit my grandparents when I was like 12, and we're walking on the beach, and one of my great aunts, who was built just like me and I'm built like a tank, she pulls off her shirt because it's 75 degrees in Seattle and she was hot. And so she just takes her shirt off and she's walking along in this, industrial strength bra, and her clothes. And nobody in my family skipped a beat in
Mhm.
the conversation, but I was 12. So I was just at that age where I'm starting to become aware of the world outside my family. And I noticed how nobody skipped a beat. And I thought, but this isn't what other people typically do, you know?
Right.
And that's when I sort of began to notice my family's a little different, I think, you know.
Mhm.
Um, so I actually taught in a graduate marriage and family therapy program for almost 30 years.
Mhm.
And I specialized in medical family therapy, the impact of illness on people's lives. I trained physicians. I had a faculty appointment in the University of Washington School of Medicine or family medicine department. But I always taught the human sexuality course for marriage and family therapists because it was a required course for licensure. And I was the only faculty that actually was excited to teach it, so I taught it from the early 90s forward every year.
Mhm.
And I would have my students as one of their assignments to really look at their sexual health narrative or gender identity narrative and how affection and this kind of things. And I would give them 60, 80 questions to just sort of walk them through thinking through this, because we don't have comprehensive sex education in the United States. And so we have so much ignorance. And I just thought my students, to be good therapists, they need to know where their stories begin and end, right?
Mhm.
And their clients'
Absolutely.
stories begin and end. And
Mhm.
so if I don't have them do this, it's going to end up in the middle of the room with their clients. And I want them to have more clarity about themselves. Well, around the year 2000, I began to notice that the stories themselves in range of what people experience, that had not changed, but what had changed was how they described themselves in those stories. They started describing themselves as humiliated, disgusted, thinking of themselves as perverted for what they thought, for what they felt, for what they did with others, with themselves, and their amount of ignorance about what was developmentally typical as you grow up, right? The curiosities you're gonna have from toddler forward, they are thinking about that was they didn't know what was common, and they felt bad about what was in essence very common. So I started to become really concerned about them, concerned about what they had experienced and what had changed in life. And I didn't know what I was seeing at first. It took about 3 years of lots of conversations, to finally realize I was seeing the first wave of students that had gotten the abstinence only education in school, which was religiously based education. Most people don't realize that, but if they go back and they look at what was happening, what policies we were passing, it was religiously based education. We now know it's 80% medically inaccurate, even though it's still taught in many places. And some of my students, because I taught at a university that the undergrad was religiously based, some of my students in the grad program had also come from conservative religious backgrounds. So they had layered on top of it, right? Youth group experiences, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, actually, it's really interesting because a lot of the women I work with grew up in the 90s and they experienced purity culture, which is exactly what you're talking about. So
That's
keep
right.
telling the story.
No, absolutely. I mean, we now understand so much more, but at the time they were just swimming in it, right? And they were breathing it. They didn't understand. They were being taught this as early as 9 and 10 years old. It wasn't don't have sex before marriage or just don't have sex before marriage. It was don't think about anything sexual. Don't want anything sexual. Another just natural desire for connection and pleasure was pathologized, deeply pathologized. And they were told, if you cannot be pure of mind and heart, which was never defined, right? Then you will put your future in jeopardy, your future intimate relationships in jeopardy, your future eternity in jeopardy, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And many of these kids swallowed this hook, line, and sinker.
Yes, they did.
Right? Hook, line, and sinker. And what I have found is those that are the most earnest and the most naturally anxious kids who were exposed to this also are the ones that often have symptoms that look exactly like somebody who had experienced childhood sexual abuse, right? They have pelvic pain disorders, they have erectile dysfunction, they have other sexual dysfunctions. They hate themselves. They feel like they are bad to the bone, that somehow they themselves, who they are as a person, is bad, right?
Have you, that is super interesting. So would you consider somebody who's gone through purity culture to be someone who has had sexual abuse?
Their symptoms absolutely mimic that. So you have to look at the symptoms and say, well, then yes.
Actually, I've had some clients with vaginal meniscus. Is that how it
vaginismus?
Vaginismus.
Yeah.
And some of them think it was due to their exposure to purity culture in the evangelical church in the 90s. They know
absolutely
how all connected.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And I write about that in the book, Sex, God, and the Conservative Church. And I started writing that book in 2006, was published in 2017. And I was the first person to come out and say, nobody's intending this, but this is the outcome of purity culture. This is what's happening in the lives of people. We have to look at this because it's manifesting in people's lives in ways that are affecting their ability to do connection, pleasure, attachment. Well, they feel like a fraud because who they think they are on the inside is so dark that they wear a mask. And then if somebody falls in love with them, they think, well, you don't really love me, you love my mask, right? Yeah. So it affects people deeply.
Yeah. So my question for you then is, what have you seen, especially in regards to women and this deep shame from purity culture, because women are responsible for men's sexual desire?
That's right. Exactly.
In purity culture. So how they dress, how they look, how they behave, like what has that done to a generation of women? I would like you to first address all the women, but then I want you to talk about especially women who are not straight.
Right. This is part of, I go over all of this stuff sort of in detail so people can see the context in the book, Sex, God, and the Conservative Church. But the sexual ethic that has been in place for thousands of years now is a sexual ethic that grew out of the 4th century, did not grow out of Jesus' ministry, grew out of the 4th century when Constantine, who was the emperor, became a Christian, could then appoint the men to be the leaders of this new church.
Right.
At that particular point in history, the men were vying for political power, church power, same thing, by who could deny the body the most.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when they could not, they had women to blame for it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is thousands of years old, and we are still doing it today.
Mm-hmm.
Just as much inside the church as outside the church in secular culture, right?
Yeah.
Women are to blame. Men are not held accountable for what they say and do, especially in the realm of sexuality. We give them a pass.
Mm-hmm.
So women then grow up with, so I think what we have to understand here is women who hit their teens in the 90s, it was during a time when in the mid 80s, we reduced and actually withdrew most of the regulations on the FCC, the Federal Communication Commission, so how we did media.
Right.
The same time, we began then allowing so much more violence against women on TV, in the movies, in video games, which were launching right at that time, and music videos.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
We have for more than 40 years been different iterations and of different major organizations, including Congress, asking for the passage of laws to protect women against violence against women, because we have enough research to show that there's a correlation there, right? And we have yet to pass a law. So we've had increase in violence against women as a primary educator, right? Because pornography came on board too, the internet came on board, right? Primary educator of the public, while we don't provide education so that kids can be empowered to protect themselves, right? So women are getting a double fear message around their bodies.
Absolutely.
Right? So at the age of 9 or 10, many women say, that was the first time I got whistled at. That's the first time somebody did something or whatever to me. Just sort of out in the world, of course, we've got many children who are facing sexual abuse as early as 5 or 6 years old. Like, I think the most common age is 6 by somebody in their 20s, inside their family usually, or inside their community. So we have that, and then we have all what's happening in secular culture. And so women are feeling even more afraid to go out in public, literally, for their own safety, while we simultaneously aren't acknowledging this, and we continue to support it, right? So much so that then women start to realize, I have to, this is, well, we can talk about, there's a whole range of things here, but often women are getting a message that they, in order to have power, they've got to create relationships with men.
Correct.
But men are dangerous, according to this message that they're getting, right? So now they're caught in a double bind, right? I need to somehow try to adhere myself to this thing that's dangerous to me, in order to have some kind of social power. But at the same time, it's nothing about this is feeling safe to me. And it must be me, because I don't have a place to talk about it, because nobody's talking about it.
Right. Nobody does talk about anything in this country.
No, right. So if we now start talking about people who may have been assigned male at birth, but don't feel male at all, they're now noticing all of this. Or we have somebody that is born female, sees themselves cis female, but is attracted to people who are female, right? Now that's actually on some level, while still underground, maybe in their home environment, still feels like maybe a safer, if I could get there a safer person, somebody who might understand some of this dilemma that I'm in, right? So there's a lot to this, but shame and silence is over all of it, while at the same time embedded in a culture that is inherently dangerous. It's not holding all genders responsible for what they say and do, period.
So, are you in the process of coming out later in life? Are you feeling isolated or lost, cut off from friends and family, or just trying to figure out what is the next step for you? Well, I have a wonderful coaching program called Lotus Group Coaching. It is for people who are female identifying, cis or trans, or non-binary folks comfortable in those spaces. And we provide emotional, spiritual, and intellectual support for people who are in the process of coming out later in life. We discuss many things in our community, but what's most important is that you have a community of others who understand. Each one of the coaches in the program have come out later in life, and everybody who is a member of our program is somewhere in the process. So if you are seeking community and you want a soft place to land, go to my website, Anne-MarieZanzal.com, and book a connection call. We would love to talk to you.
Can I ask you, how do you define shame?
Can I give you the operational definition of sexual shame?
Sure.
We just came up with this through research in 2017.
Okay.
And this was, somebody came to me and said, I wanted to do my doctoral dissertation on religious sexual shame. But when I got into the literature, there wasn't even one operational definition of sexual shame, only shame, which is, so much of the work of Brene Brown has been so fabulous for the public, right? But sexual shame was still not being looked at. And so she did her research. And I want to read to you and for your listeners, that the definition, because it is so often what we see in our offices when we are doing this work, when we're sitting with people, when we're really listening to their stories, right? So this is the work of Dr. Noel Clark in 2017. Sexual shame is a visceral feeling. So in our bodies, not just here, in our bodies, a visceral feeling of humiliation and disgust toward one's own body and identity as a sexual being. And a belief of being abnormal, inferior, and unworthy to your core. This feeling can be internalized, right? It becomes internalized, but it also manifests in interpersonal relationships, having a negative impact on trust, communication, and physical and emotional intimacy. So you see right at that place of real attachment, of real vulnerability and attachment. Sexual shame develops across the lifespan in interactions with interpersonal relationships. And I'll come back to this in a second. One's culture and society then starts to play a role, right? And then a subsequent critical self-appraisal starts. So an internal critic gets going, reeling these messages over and over inside of us from that experience. There is also a fear and uncertainty related to one's power or right to make decisions, including safety decisions related to sexual encounters, along with an internalized judgment toward one's own sexual desire, right? So in this last statement, we saw this in the work of Peggy Ornstein. She wrote a book called Girls and Sex. And in that book, she talked about how she interviewed 80 girls, 15 to 22, and they often were describing themselves as confident and competent in different areas of their life until they got ready to go out. And then they were putting down 3, 4, and 5 shots of hard liquor because they didn't know if they could keep themselves safe or if they had the right to. And the vast majority of the people she interviewed were described themselves as non-religious or coming from non-religious homes. In this piece of research that Noelle did, also the vast majority of the people that she interviewed described themselves as coming from non-religious homes. So this is so, my point is this is so entrenched across our cultural experience.
And I also do think that sometimes parents may reject religion, but their values are still within them. And so
Very
even
much.
though you don't grow up in a religious home, you still receive those values.
Yes. And those are often epigenetic, right? They've come down from generations to generations, right? Absolutely. But I want to just come back really quick to just say one thing. We talk about shame as beginning in interpersonal relationships. I have come to believe in doing this work that sexual shame is our first shame for the vast majority of people who grow up in the US.
Mm-hmm.
That is because epigenetically, people have not been given sex education, come to see sexuality and development as normal and understand child development in that sense. I mean, I used to have students that would take 3 developmental courses and not once did they cover sexual development,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Typical in the US. You can become a therapist or a physician or a clergy member and get no sex education.
Right.
In your graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
So the rampant naivete in the US is pretty insane.
Interesting. You'll find this really interesting. So first of all, I'm an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
No, you don't get any sexual education in divinity school because I've been there.
Yeah, right.
But this is really through my own self-discovery. So when I was young, in one summer when I was 14, I kissed a boy for the first time, and I had sexual play with a girl.
Mm-hmm.
I got naked with another girl.
Sure.
The kiss with the boy got filed away as a pleasant little memory, and the experience with the girl, which is quick, very, very normal for a young lesbian.
Oh, absolutely.
Super
Yes.
normal, got filed under shame. And it wasn't until I came out that a lot of my women that I work with do this as well. These things that we file under, like, oh, I'm wrong, or oh, this is shameful, or this is, oh, I'm guilty about that. We do a reordering of those memories. And so I took that out of the shame basket and put it in, oh, that was perfectly normal.
Absolutely.
But like it part of my coming out later in life has been my entangling of sexual shame, because I also grew up in a very religious household,
Mm-hmm.
Catholic. My mother was, I don't know if you've ever heard of a Baltimore Catechism Catholic. I mean, she was born in she was 40 when I was born. Like, sex was bad.
Yeah.
So when I had my first sexual experience with a boy, it wasn't good, but I had already been acculturated to be told that it wasn't going to be good. So,
right.
But I couldn't separate not good from, oh, I don't really want to be with this person, but I'm supposed to be with this person because I've been told my whole life I'm supposed to be with this person. I couldn't separate any of that out in really until the last 10 years of my life.
Uh-huh.
I came out and like realized, because I was smart enough to know that I felt guilty about having sex without marriage. You know?
Yes. Yes, sure.
So that's what I chalked it up to. And it took me a long, long time to untangle all of that. So, I am like the example of sexual shame here.
But one of the things I'm curious about in your story is when you started experiencing desire, that wave, that feeling, that strong feeling, did that early on, did the wave of desire get filed in shame? And did you have to later pull it out? So like your experience at 14, I'd imagine felt a whole lot better with the girl than it did with the boy. And did that feeling have something to do? Because there's a big message about desire is not okay.
Probably the desire got, everything was, I actually write about it in my book. It, like I used to read my mother's Harold Robbins novels.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I tucked it, they were in I write about shame in the book, and like it was very shameful. I would stand in the hallway and read it, and I was only interested in the scenes that involved women. I did not care what happened to the men. I just didn't care.
Right.
But I was very fascinated, and I was little. I was like 12, 13, 14.
Yeah.
And yes, my desire got filed under. That was just, any sexual desire was really shameful.
Right.
It was just shameful, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think about how 10-month-old children are beginning to realize they can reach out and grab something,
Right.
that they have control of their hands.
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere between 10 months and a year, when they're getting their diaper changed or they're in the tub, they discover their genitals.
Mm-hmm.
Like the vast majority of children are going to do this, little toddlers, unless their caregiver is someone who can say, oh yeah, that's your penis, or oh yeah, that's your vulva. It's a wonderful part of your body. And let's finish getting you dressed, or let's finish whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Unless there's somebody who can, along the way, keep offering explanation so the child gets to learn about, head, shoulders, knees, and toes, and vulvas and penises,
Mm-hmm.
they're instead, what often happens to most kids is somebody slaps their hand away or gets angry, like, gross, that's yucky, don't do that, right? And so they can't understand what that is. And of course, they're not going to stop because they don't have the cognitive capacity to understand to stop until they're 4 or 5, right? And so this happens multiple times in their childhood, beginning pre-verbally.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing they can think is something is wrong with me.
Right.
It's me. I don't know what else. This is just me because I'm being curious. I'm just being me. Right. And so this is starting really early. We might remember getting in trouble from playing doctor at 5 or 6.
Mm-hmm. Almost everybody I've ever worked with.
Right.
For doing stuff like
that. But
we
have to understand that it has happened hundreds, if not thousands of times before that memory stuck. And
mm-hmm.
that's why sexual shame is so deeply woven within us. I think it's a complex trauma because it happens year after year after year in increasingly complex ways until we can begin to talk about it and begin to understand it. But I think we have to appreciate how long it's been going on.
Mm-hmm. So how do you start to erase the shame? First of all, I'm going to go out and get your book and read because I think it'd be very helpful for the women I work with.
Yeah, I think you'll love it with your background.
Yeah, I've done a lot of this work myself. Most of the therapists, honestly, that I've worked with around this have really not been very good. Yeah. They really, I'm just going to say, they suck with women coming out later in life because they don't understand it at all. So I find that what works with my later in life community is the shared common humanity. That we get together, we discuss these things, and then people realize, oh, wait a minute, you thought this too? I thought I was the only one thought. Yeah, that has group work has been life-saving for people.
Yes.
How do you begin to erase the shame?
Yeah.
How do you start? Like if you're somebody who's like, oh my God, they're talking about me right now. Mm-hmm. What do you do? And how do you find somebody, if you can't do it yourself, how do you find somebody who's competent?
Yeah, good question. So I'll say that the book, the Sex, God, and Conservative Church book, is written for providers, but it's talking to the people who've experienced it. And I did it that way because I too was struggling with the lack of cultural competency that therapists had to work with people who had come from backgrounds where religion was a piece of the story, right? Mm-hmm. But I was hearing and seeing so many people where this was what they lived with. I thought, if I can make a book that helps both, the person who doesn't understand it, but who's treating people, and the people who've experienced it and get frustrated with their therapist who doesn't understand, and they can say, you read this, you do your work, and then I'll work with you, kind of a thing or something, But I think that the healing process is challenging. Right? Because it's a part of us. It's been a part of us for a long time. So that unwinding and taking apart takes time. But I talk about healing the mess, the model for erasing sexual shame. And I say that there are 4 areas that you're going to kind of want to start with working with. And it's frame, name, claim, and aim. Frame is get yourself a scaffolding or a frame of sexual health information. There's a ton of good books out there. There's videos that you can watch on sexual health websites that will give you education so that you can then begin to see what was mythology and what is true about your body, about whatever, like just start learning and be able to separate out myth and bias from truth. So that's frame. Name is exactly what you're talking about right there when you talk about your groups. It is tell your story. Tell your story to at least one other person who's compassionate and empathic and can say, oh yeah, that's common, at least one person. So I'll sometimes say to people, if you have some friends that you've begun to have some of these conversations with, go get the book and just read the book together and stop every half chapter and just talk about what you're relating to of what's being said, just because you're going to find out you're not alone. When I talk to audiences around the country and I say, raise your hand if you grew up in a home that it was safe to talk about bodies and sexuality and affection and attraction and gender identity. Maybe 5 hands will go up in 100. Right?
Absolutely.
It's just so rare in our country. It's so rare. And so I'm like, you need to know you're not alone. Years ago, this has probably been 15 years now, some students and I had been talking about this forever, for a long time. And they were all doing therapy and healing and growing. And one day I had this thought, what if we put together a website, a lot like Dan Savage's website of It Gets Better, right? And we put one together, but it was a place where people who came from religious backgrounds and had seen how it had hurt their sexuality and their ability to do relationships had been on a healing journey, and they could talk a little bit about, this is what I grew up with, and this is what I've been doing, and this is what I come to think now. And so we put together a website called thankgodforsex.org, and there are videos on there. And this was just so that they could start to say it doesn't have to be silent anymore. We've been so afraid to tell other people because, we thought we would be judged, but now there's more of us, and we're finding out that we're a community of people. And I'm like, you guys represent 0.5% of the country. Like, we ought to put this out there somewhere. And so we did. I think telling your story is incredibly liberating, like you've seen in your groups, when you start to feel like, oh, you mean I'm normal? I've always been normal. Like, wow, what? that's awesome. So that's name. And then claim is learn to claim your body as good. If you get up in the morning and you are not in severe pain, right, you're able to feel relatively okay in your body. It's a good body. But we live in a culture that runs its economy on you feeling badly about what you look like or what you have or don't have, so it can sell more products. We live in a country that values products over people across the board, right? And so if you don't think of your body as good because of however it is, I'm a Swede, so I am sturdy as they come. I am always 30 to 40 pounds over what, you would consider normal weight, but I am so what my people look like, I'm right in there. And you need to know that your heredity shapes so much more about what's going on and how your body is and all kinds of things. And it's a good body. And I want for people that whenever the time comes that they are towards the end of their life, that they look back and see that they valued their body as good. And they value that they had 5 senses, which to just enjoy life through, right? And so when people start doing these 3 things, getting the good information, the frame, the name, the claim, what they begin to do without even realize it is they start shaping a new legacy, a new sexual health legacy that they'll pass on to the people that they love. right? And so that you don't have to pass this down anymore.
So can you give me the acronym again?
Yeah, it's healing the mess, the model for erasing sexual shame, frame, name, claim, and then aim for a new legacy.
So did that aim for the new legacy bring you to your next book about raising shame-free children? Because that sounds like a natural occurrence.
So I've never been asked that question before, but I would say yes, but I didn't know it. And so the way it happened was I just started hearing from so many people around the globe who had read the Sex, God, and Conservative Church book and said, that's been so helpful. I feel so seen. I understand myself. I feel like I know how to heal, blah, blah. But I know I don't want to do to my kids or to the kids in my life what was done to me, but I don't know what to do. Can you help me? And I said, I can totally do that because I've been teaching this stuff forever to physicians and therapists and whatnot. Let me put together a book that goes basically step by step. Hold your hand. Birth to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6, 6 to 8, up to 18. I'm going to tell you what the typical emotional tasks are that kids are often trying to accomplish at this 2-year frame, what the behavioral tasks are that they're often trying to do, the things you're going to see them doing, hear them doing, whatever, typically. And then what are the sensual, sexual, body, relational curiosities that emerge in these 2 years? Then I'm going to invite you to ask yourself, how will that be for you when your child begins to do X or Y? Discovers their genitals, walks in on you, I don't know, whatever. I mean, all the different things. Listen to what happens when you imagine that. If you can feel any place in your body where you go, I don't know what to do, or that feels yucky, or I feel like, anxious, that I want you to just put your hand on your heart and say, oh, baby, you are so good. That is only your body telling you that you didn't get what you needed at that age. That's all. That's all that's telling you. Now, let's imagine what might you have gotten and from whom, and what would you have wanted? And if you had gotten what we're suggesting here, how might life have been different for you as a toddler or as, kindergartner or, a grade schooler or whatever. And so we just walk them through. And at the end of every little section is a place for them to keep notes on their own life and notes on their kids' lives. And so it's a process of, I say to folks, you only need to be 2 years ahead of your kid. That's all. Just 2 years. You don't have to have it all figured out, but you want, and at the end of every section, every chapter section, I say, here are the leading books for kids, the leading books for adults in this area, and the top websites that you can go to. So I do all the work for you. So it's like, you don't have to have this all figured out. Go get the books, read the books, put them out for your kids, lay them around the table so that they can find them. When they pick them up, sit down and read it to them. The books will give you the language. You don't have to come up with it. And you will slowly become more and more familiar as time goes on. And it'll start to feel more and more natural to you. But you are going to literally neurobiologically change up your brain in doing this process.
So it sounds like part of the healing process, or excuse me, about working with your children regarding this is inner child work. It sounds like you have to almost reparent yourself.
You do. And I actually think that's what's happening. What people are doing is they're reparenting themselves. I've had people write me and say, I don't have kids, but I decided to get your book anyway. And it has been so helpful for me to see I was normal at these different ages. And I just didn't have people in my life that knew how to give me what I needed. It's been very, very liberating, and I think that's great. And I went on to do handouts for doctors, therapists, clergy, coaches that you can get on my website. That's just front and back, like 2 to 4, front and back, and it's got all that same information, 6 to 8. And so that you can run them off, you can do whatever you want to with them. You can turn them into posters for all I care. But you can give them, because these are the people I think of as our frontline workers, right? Our educators, our therapists, our pediatricians, whatever. And I know from just working in medicine that I had so many doctors that were like, I can't add one more thing. And I'm like, I got you. I'm going to give you a handout that you can say, so while they're accomplishing these tasks, there's some other things that are going on too. I want you to read this. And if you have any questions, let me know.
Well, I think your work is absolutely fascinating, Dr. Schermer-Sellers. I could keep talking to you for a very, very long time. And I really want to thank you for all the good work you're doing. It is phenomenally important.
Thank
And
you.
having worked with 80%, I did an informal poll once in my Facebook group, and 80% of all women that I work with come out of conservative faith traditions.
Wow.
Yeah, and mostly, and it's mostly evangelical, Pentecostal, and as well as Orthodox, Orthodox Jewish folks and stuff like that. And I know that sexual shame plays a really huge role in preventing people, women especially, and men. I've met plenty of men as well who've grown up in conservative cultures, religious cultures. It prevents them from finding their full authenticity, the sexual.
Exactly.
And once once I, for my own personal experience, once I accepted that I was queer, a lot of that fell away. And also really helped me rethink how I thought about things, So your work is incredibly important, and I'm really excited to talk to you today. And I want to just ask you a couple of questions. I end my podcast every time. What book or movie changed your perspective in life?
Oh gosh, I'm so old that's a hard one to do. I'll tell you that there was a movie fairly recently, within the last 5 years, that caused a shift that I didn't even know was happening, but I can see it now. And that is a movie it's a documentary, and it's called Fantastic Fungi. So it's about mushrooms, and it's done by Paul Stamets and Louis Schwartzberg, I think is his last name. So it's created a lot of shift and change in just how I think about the earth. And then I have just finished a year-long program on psychedelic assisted therapies that I'm wanting to help support therapists and physicians that are doing this. And at some point I'll do a clinical trial on healing religious sexual shame and trauma using MDMA, probably. Yeah. Sometime in the, after it becomes legal. But yeah, that was a movie that was creating a shift that I didn't even know was shifting yet, but it has been for sure huge.
So I'm out of question of curiosity, because on the form you said shamanism, personal quest of communion with nature and creation.
Yeah.
And so what is that book or movie?
So that book goes right along with it. So that book is by Donna Oscar Miro Quesada. He is a shaman of the oh gosh, I'm blanking. I'm blanking on the tradition, but it's an Andes tradition. And that book has been one that I've been diving into. Now, I had a mentor who shaped my life and the therapy that I was doing quite a lot for about a decade. And she died in 2018. And Don Oscar was her shaman. And so I learned a lot from her. And now I've since started studying more of the stuff that he's doing. And you can learn more about it at theheartofthehealer.org. You can learn about the tradition and all about it. But ancient wisdoms are really where we ought to be spending our time, because they've been right all along. And patriarchy and capitalism has taken us away from what actually nourishes our health and our wellness, from inside to outside. And we're now destroying that, both inside and outside. And we have been.
Well, it nurtures our humanity.
Yes.
That's what it nurtures. I was thinking about when you were talking about our bodies and, how women with their bodies and how it's done to fund capitalism. I really appreciate what you are saying about the ancient wisdom. And I had my first experience with the shaman about a year or two ago, and it was actually quite an interesting experience. And she really, really helped me heal from something.
Wow.
Like 100%. Now, I'm surprised I'm saying that, but she really did.
Yeah.
It was just one specific incident in my life, and since then I have let it go. I've let it go. So it was really powerful.
Yes.
How would you describe your life today?
Quieter than it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
We have 4 kids and they're all grown and gone. And I have 2 granddaughters. So yeah, it's quieter. There's a lot of time for and thought that's going into how to continue to support good work in the world. And I think I have a even deeper investment now that I've got 2 granddaughters, and so yeah, it's quiet and it's I feel very grateful for the people in my life.
I would like to thank you very much for coming on the show today, Dr. Tina Schermer-Sellers. Her books are Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, Erasing Shame from Sexual Intimacy. Oh, that's not the subtitle. It is Dr. Sellers' book is Sex, God, and the Conservative Church. And her latest book is Shameless Parenting, Everything You Need to Raise Shame-Free, Confident Kids and Heal Your Shame Too. So thank you so much for just opening a little tidbit of this conversation today.
Oh, thank you so much, Anne-Marie. It was a joy to be with you.
You've been listening to Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA+ stories with Anne-Marie Zanzal. New episodes of the Coming Out and Beyond podcast drop every other Friday. You can tune in at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and at annemariezanzal.com. Be sure to hit subscribe when tuning in so you never miss an episode. And for more resources, articles, videos, and a free downloadable guide for coming out later in life, visit annemariezanzal.com.